today to come to AVA and hear this artist talk. I have the pleasure of introducing today Nicholas Gaffney, who is a fabulous photographer. We feel so fortunate to have his work here at AVA. Nick got his Master's in Fine Arts from the Pratt Institute in 2002, and he has been teaching undergraduate digital media as well as photography. Many of those years have been at Colby Sawyer College. And I just want to say that some of the joy that I really find in this work for me is being from this area. You know, you just fall in love with landscapes, right? And they are, landscapes are, you know, can be different, whether it's just someone's backyard or a beautiful lush hill. And I think just seeing the way that Nick captures these little beautiful pockets in our backyards is just so much fun to look at. And so thank you so much for being here, Nick. And without any further ado, Nicholas Gaffney.
Thank you to Ava and Neil especially for hanging the show and doing such a great job of that. And I've said it before, but I feel really fortunate to show it in person with Ava. It's such a beautiful space to show work, and I love all the other artists who are up as well. And there's actually another one upstairs if you haven't had a chance to take a look at it as well. There's a lot of really good work here. So, I wanted to kind of, I've been living in Lebanon for almost 10 years, in August it'll be 10 years. And for this talk, I thought it'd be interesting. I'm going to talk about this work, but I wanted to begin by talking a little bit about some earlier work that I've taken in and around the Upper Valley as a way to kind of provide a little bit of context for this work, and then kind of talk about this work a little bit more. And then I'm happy to answer any questions, so feel free to ask any questions you have while I'm talking or otherwise. I moved, my wife and I moved here about 10 years ago from New York City, and I spent a lot of time in New York actually kind of photographing. It's kind of strange, kind of the landscape in and around New York City, and not really New York City proper as much, except towards the very end. So I moved up here. You might think, well, you know, you've got the lakes, you've got the rivers and the streams and the mountains and everything, so why, you know, there's so many great things to be photographing around here, you know? And we also had a very young daughter, and it's hard to find time to do make a lot of art in any sort of capacity when you have a little kid in tow, you know? And so it was I was struggling to kind of figure out what to be photographing. For some reason, I wasn't, as aspired to the landscape, at least initially, as I thought I might be, but I found I was taking a lot of trips to 12A in West Lebanon, the big box stores, and that was, for whatever reason, the thing that I don't really love going to the big box stores over there, but you need to go to buy diapers and things like that and places. So, you know, everyone has to go to Kmart or Walmart or Home Depot at some point, right? So I was spending time photographing in that sort of in some ways, a very specific landscape, right? But it's also the kind of photos that you can take in a lot of different places. You know, like most regions around the country probably have their big box store neighborhood, right? And what I was trying to do with these photographs is kind of look at the architecture and treat it as sort of interesting architecture, whether or not it was, but also kind of try to look for kind of little human things kind of in the middle of the architecture. Like, for example, it's a little hard to see, that little picnic table kind of nestled in the side of Jason Penny right there. Kind of, you know, Pizza Hut, the way the Pizza Hut kind of seemed to sort of emerge and be sort of a temple in the middle of the snowy New Hampshire winter. One of the things that I find interesting about looking at these photographs now, these are all kind of from around 2010, is I'm a documentary photographer. I like to go out in the world and look for things to document. It maybe goes without saying, but whatever you document, very often it might not even be there anymore, right? So, and you don't really necessarily realize this when you're photographing things, but you're photographing a landscape that's going to be changing at some point, right? This Pizza Hut isn't there anymore. If you're from the area, if you know the area a little bit, you know that they tore it down. I think it's a Starbucks now. So in my photographs, you know, without really meaning to, ended up kind of being kind of reminders of, like, maybe not the most beautiful landscape, but a landscape that yeah, it just kind of changed a little bit. And this is also another example of a kind of photographing the structure. There's still a McDonald's over in West Lev on 12A, but it's a different McDonald's. They tore down that McDonald's and it tried this one and put up a different one. So I like the idea of kind of photographing. You know, no, I don't think anyone thinks like McDonald's is like really wonderful, beautiful architecture, but it's hard for me to look at this and not feel like a twinge of maybe, I don't know, nostalgia is the right word, but some kind of feeling that like, oh, I photographed it before it got kind of torn down. So I was interested in kind of photographing, and I did that for a little while, kind of going to 12A, and sometimes I'd do that because I had errands to run there and I had my camera, and I like thinking locally when I'm taking my photos, and it also makes it a little bit easier. I'm not someone who likes to kind of go on grand expeditions to photograph. It's easier and kind of more fun in some ways to kind of be looking around at the neighborhoods that you spend a lot of time in. In the summer of 2011, I spent a little bit more time kind of exploring the Upper Valley in all its sort of beauty, the beauty that I kind of found in kind of smaller areas, not kind of the really big vistas of the landscapes of the White Mountains or even kind of beautiful lakes, kind of the slightly smaller things. I took this photograph actually. There's a nature preserve just kind of up and around the Storrs Hill area, if you know where that is, and I photographed this bridge. It also ended up being kind of a sort of a document of something that is no longer there. This particular bridge was washed away about maybe 2 years after I took this photograph, 1 or 2 years after I took this. So it's interesting kind of photographing things that aren't really there anymore, kind of as reminders of kind of what they were. But I was interested in, I called this particular series sort of a smaller body of work, but I called it Greenery just because I was photographing at a time in a place in the area where, kind of like right now, and hopefully even a little bit more a little bit later, right, where the green is kind of coming out of the snow and the dirt and on the mud and all that stuff. But I've always been kind of interested in kind of looking at things that are in some ways kind of mundane, like not necessarily the most interesting things and things you want to be photographing, but trying to make something out of those things. Like I'm photographing kind of the bushes that separate, that are passed behind the CCDA from the Mascoma River, and it's no one's idea of like the most beautiful, fabulous landscape that you've seen, but there's something about it that sort of intrigued me, and kind of I like the way the light made those green bushes kind of interact with that. It's a little hard to see in this slide, but kind of like the way it interacted with that kind of like kind of milky blue sky that kind of drew me to that kind of area. Or one more from this series, just the way that simple kind of kind of small tree kind of seemed to be sort of fighting against the back of that vinyl siding. And it's a little bit hard to see, but there's actually kind of a thin strip of light that kind of starts up here, coming down there, and I kind of like the way that tree almost seemed to be kind of fighting kind of that little strip of light coming through that composition. So I was going through kind of looking for things like these things and kind of thinking a little more locally, but also just thinking in terms of just wandering around a little bit more. From here, I moved. I always think it's great when you can find something that's local but also a little bit unique. Not that everything you photograph, I suppose, is unique in its own way, but maybe a little bit exotic but still local. VINS is the Vermont Institute of Natural Science over in Quechee. And if you haven't been there, it's definitely worth a trip. There's all these big it's a raptor rescue center, and you get to see snowy owls and bald eagles and peregrine falcons and things like that. And they're all birds of prey that have been hurt in some way, so they're basically in this. I don't think they can survive without VINS, so it's really great that they're there. VINS is there taking care of them. But every time you go there, I always felt a little bit sad about kind of seeing these birds kind of caught within this kind of habitat that couldn't really replicate what they would normally be in, kind of the vast skies and trees that they would normally be in. So when I took these photos, I was very interested in not just capturing the birds, but kind of photographing them within these structures that VINS has put up. That there's nothing wrong with the places that they're in, but they always seem like kind of confining compared to where they would normally be. this was one of my favorite from this series, and it's a weird kind of accident of composition that the raven, in my mind, that raven's body, kind of its wingspan seems to form an X that kind of mimics the X of the crossbars right there. But then on the other hand, the raven seems to be kind of trying to get away from that X and kind of looking out into the trees, like the real trees and not like the fake kind of imitation branches that they put up in there. But all those things kind of came together in a way that really struck me as interesting. And then one more example from this series, this hawk with a teensy bit of food kind of clutched in its talon. And I don't know how easy it is to tell, but some of the photos, when you're taking these photos, you're kind of forced to kind of photograph through bars and kind of mesh that they put up to kind of keep the birds in there. So you can kind of see it's kind of trapped in kind of that out of focus mesh that you've seen kind of in there. From these photos, I went back to 12A, and but I kind of did it in a different way. I don't know why I wasn't quite done with that particular area of kind of where which is an important part of the Upper Valley. Not many people know that there's actually a nature preserve behind Kmart in the Upper Valley. I don't necessarily recommend it as a place to go. There's a lot of ticks. There's hunters there in the fall, and it's pretty cold in winter. But I went to this landscape because I was really interested in the idea of kind of a landscape that was trapped between kind of the commercial aspect, right? Kmart, JCPenney, Home Depot, places like that, and then the big Connecticut River, right? And this little thin strip seems sort of something that like everyone gets very, very close to, right? If you go to these kind of places, you tend to you're always getting very close to this kind of landscape, but no one really actually goes there and explores and tries to kind of see it a little bit more, right? So I was interested in exploring a landscape that was a little bit different. And at first I thought these photos were just going to be kind of straight landscape photos. My attempt had been kind of straight kind of nature photography, but I kept returning when I would kind of go back and look at the photos I was taking and I was editing, kind of creating an edit for it. I kept kind of the ones that kept intriguing me the most were the ones that involved the things that seemed to have been left behind in the landscape. Maybe they'd been washed up by the river, and maybe they'd been left kind of pushed somehow there by someone kind of from one of the stores. This is I don't know if you can tell, it's a Kmart shopping cart, right? But it's actually, what's interesting is that this photograph was taken fairly far away from Kmart, so it actually had traveled a good distance. And, people would bring things back there. And the thing that I realized, I mean, not to be, I was probably naive and not really thinking about it, but there's a homeless population that exists behind Kmart and JCPenney. And if you're local and you've paid attention to the news, you know that it is an issue in terms of people who are living out of cars and trailers near Hanfords and places like that. And for these photographs, what I really ended up photographing were the things that were left behind by this population, people who, at least part of the year, would make this landscape their home. And this is a good example of kind of some of the things that you would find if you're kind of traveling through there, kind of like the genes intertwined with the plants and the roots and little blackberry, kind of old. By 2018, Sanders had an old-fashioned blackberry, cigarette butts, and and there are stories that you can find in these photos. And you can go through here. You can kind of imagine, kind of like, well, how did those genes end up crumpled up in that landscape? And it was very rare when I was kind of making these photos. I spent almost a year kind of going back to this particular spot, kind of photographing, that I would actually run into people, just sort of interesting. My schedule and their schedule, the people who were kind of spending time there, they didn't really mesh. But so I didn't really interact with the people who were there as much. What I ended up kind of finding were little kind of glimpses of the people who worked there. And I would find tents and kind of other kinds of things that weren't and I guess what I had to keep remind myself, these weren't things that were just discarded. These were things that were sort of part of people's homes for a little while. A third example from this series. It's a little bit different from the other one where the genes kind of look discarded and no one's going to remember what the genes were, But here you can actually see that people are hanging things up to dry. In the background you can kind of see a garbage bag that's kind of hanging up off of a tree. you're looking at kind of the end of a drawing line right here. So it was interesting to me, and you know, as a photographer, you're always kind of looking around at the world and you're interacting with little ways, but with these photos, for some of them, I always felt like I shouldn't be there. Like I was walking through someone's living room without them there, kind of taking pictures, and it's a kind of weird thing to be thinking about, kind of making photographs out of other people's lives to a certain extent. But it was an interesting kind of series to work on for a while. At a certain point, I felt like I wasn't saying anything new. I was kind of taking the same photos, so I stopped going there for a little while. And as a photographer, I very often, it helps, I think, when you're a photographer to look for specific, to have a project in mind, right? To have it specifically to be looking for, whether it means going behind Kmart over and over and over again for almost a year, or going to Vin's for a while and looking for raptors. From my next kind of series, it began, and this is kind of where Orbiter, the photos that are hanging on the wall, comes from. It really started with me saying, okay, I don't really want to be going to the same place over and over and over again, but I like the idea of looking for the same kind of thing and seeing if I can find the same kind of thing. And I don't know, for reasons that are maybe not totally clear to my own self, but I was really interested in the idea of looking for missing pet signs. And there's something, I mean, it's kind of funny, you know, when you see a missing pet sign, it's hard not to feel a little bit, to feel sad about it, right? It's not, you know, obviously someone is, you know, if someone has gone to the trouble of put up a sign for their missing cat or dog, you know, you're kind of looking at someone's anxiety kind of in a piece of paper, right? And it's easy to look at that and to feel bad, but it's also not the kind of, if a person is missing, there's newspaper articles written about it, there's all sorts of things that happen. You know, the police go on searches and stuff. When a cat or a dog is missing, you know, obviously we feel bad and we try to help people whose cats or dogs are missing, but it becomes a different thing. It becomes more of a personal loss and less a sort of maybe a societal loss. So I was interested in looking for missing pet signs, and for a while, it was kind of all I was really thinking about photographing. And occasionally I would find signs for other things. A lost ferret is a pet. I haven't seen too many lost ferret signs. There's a lost key sign right here. The vast majority were for lost cats and dogs. And what's the kind of thing that once you start looking for them, it's hard to not see them, you know, especially at certain times a year. Some of these are taken, you know, actually very close to my house, in my neighborhood. I don't live too far away from AVA. I live about 3 blocks that way, actually. Some are taken kind of further away in places I'd be traveling and visiting, kind of New York City and other places like that.
Can you go back?
Oh, yeah,
The
sure.
church steeple with the lost is pretty cute.
Which one?
The church with the lost sign.
Oh,
church with
yeah.
the lost people.
Yes. Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, no, that was one of the things that I was sort of thinking about, is I wanted to compose each one exactly the same way. That was sort of intentional, you know, because I just wanted to be front and center. I wanted the sign to be there. And then whatever else you happen to see in the composition was, I mean, not exactly an accident. I would sort of choose where to stand, but to a certain extent, you know, the context helped provide sort of meaning and kind of another thing to look at in the middle of that. So I'm glad you noticed that. And then I kept looking for these signs, but I am someone who is easily distractible. And so while I was looking for these signs, kind of making it my mission to look for these lost cat, mostly lost cat and lost dog signs, it really wasn't quite enough for me as a photographer just to be looking at these. And so by giving myself the mission of going off and looking for these signs, I ended up kind of looking for a lot of other things as well. And kind of, if you look around the show, if you have, you know, at the end you can look around as well. I think I put 3 lost cat signs in this show, to a certain extent, kind of as a reminder of kind of what I was looking for. But then everything else in the show was really kind of the other things that I ended up finding, and the pieces of kind of the sort of kind of landscape that I kind of interested in. And so a lot of the things that are up on the wall, I'm going to end on, are just kind of the things that I have been looking for while I was looking for these lost pet signs, and the things that I found. Maybe the things I wasn't even looking for, but the things that I found while I was looking for these lost pet signs. Like this This is only about maybe a block and a half away from my house, with this incredible sunflower plant, and it seems to be kind of emerging from the sidewalk there. And this is one of these things where I would find something, and very often I will say, okay, that is a great thing to photograph. I need to wait for the right time to photograph that. I need to return to that. And I got up early in the morning, and it was kind of foggy, and it just seemed like the right time to go off and kind of make a picture out of that strange sunflower plant. Or I walk my dog most mornings, and I do have a dog as well, not lost, thank goodness. But I will often walk in the same route, but sometimes I don't take that many photos when I'm actually walking my dog. It's tricky to take photos while you have a dog pulling on the leash, but it's a good time to look for things to photograph that you might return to and find. And this garage is also pretty, most of the photos I'm going to show in the slideshow are actually fairly local. Not every one that's on the wall is as local as some of these, but they're all kind of in New Hampshire, Vermont, and upstate New York. But this one is this garage that I just found really kind of beautiful and a little bit strange looking. Maybe because it's sort of a garage that I don't know how easy it is to tell, it's sort of on the top of a hill, kind of slopes down behind it. And I kind of like the way it was kind of like captured in those trees, and the way that kind of power cord seemed to kind of attach it to the top of the photo as well. And just the fact that this shadow of the house opposite it kind of seemed to be kind of menacing that garage in a strange way. What's funny is I now know the people who own this garage. I didn't actually. When I took the photo, I think they didn't own it, but.
Did they paint the door?
No, I don't think they painted it. They might at some point. Yes, they might.
So that garage on a leash too?
What?
There's like a leash to the garage?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Or this photo that is taken if you walk down the rail trail, which is just about a block that way, go a little bit further down the rail trail, you can kind of look into people's backyards. And I found this past winter. One of the things that's sort of interesting in terms of thinking locally about this is, first, it's interesting to see a school bus in a backyard, right? And it's kind of funny to see that in the middle of the little play set and the shed back there. I didn't realize it at the moment when I went back to look at the photo on my computer. I thought, oh, that is the bus that takes my daughters home every day. And when I pick up my daughters from the bus, that's the bus that they're riding. So it was kind of, I like the idea of kind of finding things that are interesting and then realizing that I actually have a connection to them beyond what I was actually thinking about when I was photographing them. And I think I know people, I know the bus driver, I don't really know him, but I know him to like wave to, so it's kind of interesting kind of to make that connection there. A few of the photos here are part of this overall series called Orbiter, but didn't actually make the cut for the stuff that's hanging on the walls, but I thought I'd show a couple anyways. This one was taken trick-or-treating this past October while I was kind of hanging out with my daughters, kind of trick-or-treating in the neighborhood. And my other daughter, who's not here today, she reminded me when I showed her this photo this morning, she said, like, that's my friend's house, that's Gaffney's house. So yeah, they do that every year, the haunted house. And so it's kind of nice to kind of see that. And what drew me to this particular photo is just, the eeriness of like the weird haunted house and kind of that light coming through those drapes right there, but kind of basically off what looks like a fairly ordinary garage, and I like that kind of contrast between like the scariness. Apparently it was a pretty scary haunted house. My daughter's friends eventually went in, it was actually kind of scary. But and kind of the ordinariness of the garage. Or this is a photo that, in some ways, taking pictures of discarded furniture on the side of the road is kind of an easy thing to do. There's a lot of discarded, even if you drive around, you can see that as well. But these sofas and kind of lazy boy chair, the way they were set up, for whatever reason, it almost looked like they're not put out to be discarded for someone else to take. It almost looked like they were put out like, they look like they could be in someone's living room in a strange way. I almost imagine there should be a TV set right here or something, but I thought that was funny, kind of the way they were kind of let out in that circular fashion. This is a really good example of a photograph that I discovered that, it's taken over in White Junction, not far from where a dog park that I sometimes take my dog. And was driving out of the dog park and I saw something across the street, this sign on a building, and I can't even remember what it said across the street. I thought, oh, that'll be an interesting thing to photograph. So I got out of my car, went over, took a photo of the sign. I thought, well, we'll see what happens. I ended up not really liking that photo, but then I turned around, and as soon as I turned around, I saw what I should have been photographing, which is what these bleachers kind of seemed almost to be like emerging from the snow. And it was the kind of thing that if I hadn't gotten out of the car to photograph something else, I wouldn't have even seen it. I probably just would have ignored it, right? But the fact that like I turned around at the right moment, and I like photos that, you know, you can plan out photos and kind of make sure you're taking photos of things you want to take as much as you like, but I love the kind of photos that are sort of unexpected, right? There's a term, the decisive moment, that a lot of street photographers will use when like two people are walking down, they kind of meet it just the right way and you take a photograph of them. That's kind of the easy kind of cliche to talk about that. I'm not really a street photographer, but I am someone who looks for moments where the snow is just right at those bleachers and kind of the way the light is hitting them in just the right way. And it's the kind of thing I like to find when I'm photographing. Another example of something that's a little bit off and a little bit kind of strange. This is taken in a corn maze in the, is it the Riverview Farm, which is in Plainfield. It's not too far away. It's just south of that 12A neighborhood. It's a little bit strange in this corn maze. It's a fun place to go if you haven't been. But they have these little stations where they have like American musicians, and they have like these kind of little like wooden placards for American musicians or American artists or other kinds of things. And then I do not know why these three figures are actually there in the photograph. It's a little bit more abstract and kind of surreal, but I found that really, really interesting, and just kind of also just in discovering them, and I don't know how easy it is to tell on the slide. Probably the photographs over there, it's a little easier to tell there, but the way the light kind of was, the river is not too far away from this corn maze, and the way the light was coming out and kind of hitting them in this like beautiful kind of eerie way, kind of these dead stares on these fake wooden people.
Where does the title of the series come from?
Oh, that's a good question. If you hold your, I'll get there at the very end. I promise I'll get there. It's actually right behind this object as well, but that's a really good question. This is taken kind of near where the title of the series comes from as well. This is at the Tunbridge Fair, the Tunbridge World's Fair, excuse me, which is a great place to visit early in the morning when it's actually open, but there's nothing really going on. There aren't that many people. And sometimes that's the best place to kind of go to those things if you're a photographer looking for something interesting. I really like how that magenta fence, my daughter insists it's pink, but I call it magenta, kind of exists in this kind of complicated kind of mess of kind of like awnings and other kind of structures kind of behind it. Something kind of funny and a little bit interesting about that as a composition. And another photo of, this is good. My wife, my wife always tells me I get places too early. I don't like to be late for things, so I get places a little bit early. I had to go to the bus station, and I think I was there maybe a half an hour, maybe even a little more early. And she's, why are you getting there so early? I thought, I don't want to miss the bus. So I got there, and she's right, I got here way too early, what am I going to do? And then I saw these posts kind of in this kind of strange, slightly bluish light across the street from the bus station. I thought, oh, well, I'll take a photo of that, and that'll make it worth it. And then I can say, well, that's kind of interesting. So I kind of like how these posts were kind of seemed sort of menacing and kind of interesting, kind of surrounding this off-season playing field with the cell phone tower in the distance. I don't know if that easy to see. Another photo, I think I might have actually been walking my dog when I took this particular photo, which is a little bit unusual, but I haven't had my camera because the snow had just fallen. And this is something I walk past on my dog walks pretty much every morning when I'm actually, because it's right behind the Lebanon Junior High. I don't know if some of you might know where that is, but there's this kind of, there's probably a much better technical name for it. I just call it a split trailer. But I kind of really like the way that looked. It seemed like the one kind of man-made thing in this kind of beautiful snowy landscape. There's something kind of funny about this trailer that's sort of split in two. Almost like the snow would cause it to split in two. And as my friend David asked, where does the title of the series come from? And this is also taken from the Tunbridge Fair early in the morning. And when I was interested, I really liked the way the letters and the way this kind of interesting amusement park ride existed in the kind of early fall landscape that was behind it. And so I took a photo of that, and I liked the photo, but the more I looked at this one on my computer screen and when I made a print of it, the more I felt like this kind of, in a weird way, the word orbiter made sense to the series of photos that I was taking, right? I wasn't really looking for something particular, but I was really, really excited about the things that I ended up finding with my camera when I was looking for these things. And I don't know, my definition for an orbiter in terms of the series is something that kind of like hovers over the surface of things, looking down. You know, as a photographer, you're always a little bit separate from your subjects because you're looking at things through your camera. You're always a little bit distant, but that seemed to kind of be a good word to describe at least the kind of photography that I do, a little bit distant from things, but also really interested in them. So I don't know, I hope that answers your question. It's a little bit, so yeah, and this one is actually right behind here, so after the talk, you're welcome to look at that. That's all the slides I have, but I don't know if anyone has any questions about any of the work or anything else. I'm happy to ask.
Have you done black and white?
When I first started doing photography, yes, but it's been a long time. When I went into graduate school, that was the first time I really started doing color photography, and I really fell in love with just, I learned to be a color photographer in the darkroom before I started working with a digital camera, so I really liked working with color in the darkroom, which is in some ways easier, in some ways a lot harder than black and white, depending on how you do it, but I just never went back. I really like, one of the reasons I think I photograph is because I kind of like the colors around me, so, and nothing against black and white photography, which there's wonderful, I should probably force myself to take some photos in black and white just to see what I can do, but there's something really nice about colors, you know, so. Yeah, hi.
I really like Orbiter and what you said about the, why you called it that, but you could also, I was thinking you should have called it Lost and Found.
Yeah.
Because I actually like the Lost cat and dog signs when you had them multiple on the slide.
Yeah.
And you could even think about that as an arrangement. That kind of gave them more punch because you really, I had noticed the composition is the same across all of them.
Yeah.
That kind of was really a nice.
No, I had a thought about, for a little while I was thinking I would maybe hang them in a grid like that. I ended up, I sort of felt like it would almost be, the series become almost too much about the Lost Cat ones, and I didn't necessarily want them to be as much about them initially, but I did have a thought about doing that. It's possible I might do that at some future point, because I like to do more with all those Lost Cat photos that I've taken and really figured out. Yeah, so. Do you have a question?
Do you ever use fill flash, or is it all absolutely?
I don't know. It's no flash at all. I mean, yeah, I have sort of like strict rules for how I set up my camera, which I mean are too technical to kind of really bore people with. But like, I always kind of like photograph with this. But occasionally I'll up the ISO or something. But usually it's a kind of very strict way of kind of photographing. So I feel like if you give yourself those kind of rules, it kind of helps to kind of keep the feel of things sort of consistent, I guess. But no, I don't use a flash. No. Any questions?
Yeah. I'm just curious how many of the compositions you had like studied, on your walks compared to ones you may have just driven by. And did you look at a lot of these over and over?
It really depends. The Orbiter was one that, like, I took this long walk from the Tunbridge Fair early in the morning, and I walked past it about 3 times saying, how am I going to take photograph of that? How am I going to take photograph of that? And then I kind of figured it out. So that was over the course of maybe half an hour. Some of them are things I just kind of find, like this green car. I love the Adirondacks, but I kind of went to a farmer's market that also had an auto show nearby, and I thought that's great. And I just saw that and happened to be in the right place. I think I said that garage is the kind of thing that like I would see over and over again before I figured it out. So it really kind of depends, I would say more often than not, it's a little bit more something that I'm surprised by, that I'm there for the moment, but there are definitely some that were, like the sunflowers is definitely one that I'm return to, and trying to think. I think a lot of them actually for this particular edit things that I just kind of ended up finding. So yeah. Jill?
Well, I was just thinking, we love seeing your work on Instagram.
Oh.
And
I do post myself on Instagram sometimes as well. Yeah.
but sometimes one of us will take a picture and then we're like, oh, that's not really our brand, that's a Nick Gaffney. So I'm curious, it happens to you too. And I was curious if you had to, maybe it's sort of an ineffable visual thing, but if you had to define the characteristics of the Nick Gaffney photo. I don't know what they are, but I know it when I see it, but maybe you know what they are.
I'm not, I mean, there's this term, the vernacular landscape, that I've heard, which is sort of a catch-all for maybe this sort of the style of photography that I do. It's a landscape that is not really about big, beautiful vistas or whatever, but kind of more about kind of the kind of thing that describes the places that I visit, I guess, so the area that's around me. I'm not sure if I can kind of pin it to more than that, except that, like, I'm interested. I think a lot of the things I photograph are sort of mundane things that are, I don't think a lot of people would necessarily choose to photograph. Maybe in some cases they would, right? But there's some kind of beauty or, for lack of a better word, interestingness that kind of makes me want to describe that thing, kind of put it out in the world. That it makes sense for me to be photographing it, even though I don't know if anyone else would necessarily want to photograph that garage or that utility pole between the trees, you know. But it's something that kind of catches my eye, and it's also the kind of thing where I photograph a lot more than I actually print, right? So there's a lot of things I will photograph, and I will go back. I mean, half of photography is in the editing, kind of looking at the photographs that you've taken, you know. A camera is kind of a collection tool to a certain extent, and then you go back and you kind of figure out, okay, which things that I collect are I'm actually going to keep, and which ones I'm going to throw out, right? So there's a lot of photographs that I take that I don't really like, and then there's something that I do. So I think the edit comes into a lot as well. I don't know, does that answer your question?
I'm always interested in influences, you know, other people who have influenced an artist, and just I helped hang the show just before.
I know, thank you very much. I came in when you were doing it, so I
No, but
appreciate
what I was
it.
going to say is I had just been in New York a week or so before that, and I saw this really wonderful show of William Eggleston's work
Oh, sure.
at the Met, and some
in
of
the
what you
AVA.
do really resonates. And I just wondered if he was an influence, but who are your influences?
Eggleston is definitely one of the ones who's influenced me. Yeah, I don't know if we're exactly the same. He's but yeah, definitely. And especially, his photos are almost always about, if you don't know, he's a kind of color photographer who shoots 35mm film and is from the South. I think he's from Tennessee, but he photographs in the South, but kind of in a sort of vernacular kind of style that I think really is a different kind of place that we're photographing in. But yeah, I definitely like him. I like a lot of there's a school photographer, the New Topographics, Robert Adams, Roosevelt, Stephen Shore, who kind of became very well known in the 70s for photographing the landscape, but kind of like the changing landscape, especially this changing western landscape. I really like Lee Friedlander is another one who I think a lot of people would probably really like, but he's a black and white photographer, not color, but you know, sort of a street photographer, but a very kind of quirky, subtle but very quirky sort of street photographer. In terms of color, my favorite photographer might be a woman named Helen Levitt, who is a real street photographer in New York City, and she did a lot of black and white work as well, but I always loved, she did a lot of photographs in color in the 70s and 80s in New York City, just to kind of, often kids playing in the street in New York, but her photos are just, you know, I could look at hers forever, and I always find something to look at there. I love looking at old photography and like history of photography and things like that. So that, you know, I can go on and on talking about different people who I'm interested in thinking about in different ways. So, you know, there's a new kind of photographer who's a little more contemporary named Ron Jude, whose work I like, who photographs. I've done a lot of photographs in the Southwest. I think he's actually from Oregon, but he's someone I've been looking at a lot recently and really like his work. Kind of his landscapes are even a little more emptier than mine. There's something really interesting about it.
What's his name?
Ron Jude, R-O-N-G-J-U-D-E. I think I'm pronouncing it right. But yeah, he has a book out called Lago, which I found really kind of interesting in the southwestern United States photographs. Yeah.
In the use of photography, right? Almost like an intentional absence of any people.
Yeah.
Is that
That is intentional. Sometimes I'll put people in the photographs. I think in the background, there's a couple of them, you can see it. This photograph, it's sort of interesting. I took 2 photographs of this. In one of them is what you're seeing, right? In the other one, there's actually a guy standing here, kind of stretching, right? And in some ways, maybe that would have been a more interesting photograph because there's a person in the picture, and they were kind of like, I don't know, a cook or something, who was kind of like stretching. But for whatever reason, I didn't want him in the photograph. I really wanted it to be more about the composition, more about the way that fence looked, and I felt like I'm not someone who necessarily. I love portrait photography, and I love lots of street photography and people who are using people in their work, but I'm kind of a shy photographer, you know what I mean? And I'm also someone who, I think at a certain point for these photographs, I really want them just to be about the place and not necessarily about the people in the place. That's what I was the most interested in. But yeah.
Yeah, I love that there's no humans there, but in every single photograph, there's human presence.
Yeah, yeah.
Every single one of these implies human presence. It's not, you're not out there in the woods photographing the beauty of nature. It's, every one of these has something to do with humans, but they're not there. I love that about it.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Yeah. Yeah.
Where's that Gaffney shooting gallery?
That is, believe it or not, there's 3 photos of the Tunbridge Fair. That's also in the Tunbridge Fair, the morning after, you know? So, yeah. So, it's an interesting thing to find. So, yeah.
As we were unpacking these photos, it was going, I felt like I was looking through the seasons, winter and spring and summer, fall.
Yeah.
And so now that this is a new year, and just kind of wondering if you could say anything about what is grabbing your attention now.
I don't know. I feel like in the preparation for the show, I haven't been shooting as much. I think it's hard to kind of keep your mind on more than one thing at a time. So. But I guess what I would say is I don't know if this series is totally over, I mean, I'm really happy with this edit and happy with the things that are up here, but I think I could even push it a little bit further and go a little bit further with what I'm photographing. So I'm continuing to kind of looking around at the landscape kind of in the different seasons, yeah. And there is something kind of seasonal about kind of the different ones. I think a lot, especially, I mean, we live in New England, where there are 4 very strong definitive seasons, right? So it's hard to not do the photography I'm doing and not have that part of the images to a certain extent, yeah. So, but so I guess I'm continuing to kind of photograph within this series. I have some other ideas, but I don't know. I'm kind of in a place where I'm still trying to figure that out.
Yeah. Cool.
Is that supposed to look like the candy that comes on the street? That's what it reminds me of.
I hadn't thought of that, Sarah, but thank you. That's a really good thought. Yeah. Thank you all very much for coming.